my name is Lindsay. It is so nice to see you guys again. Today we are going to be jumping into the story of Joseph again for like the 4th time now. But hey, that's just the way it's going to go. I think it's actually probably a really good idea for us to maybe just stick with the same Bible story for a little while, especially if there's more juicy stuff to pull out of it. I know it's really tempting to just want to go all over the place, but I think let's just slow down for a little while and stay focused on the story of Joseph. Now, I have just been reading the last couple of chapters following on from last week's video. So if you haven't watched that one yet, please go out and check it out and like, comment, subscribe, click the notification bell, share it with a friend, all of those wonderful things, and then come straight back here. So if you've already done those things, let's jump straight in. And today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 40, 41, and especially chapter 42 verses 50 to 52. Okay, that's going to be our main little section that we're going to be talking about. But to build up, let's just go into a bit of the backstory of what's going on. So let's open up to chapter 40. You can hear the birds are saying hello. Okay, so basically in chapter 40, we left off last week at the end of chapter 39 where Joseph had just been put into prison, and then, you know, he was getting favor with the prison guard and everything, and now he was in charge of the prison essentially. So where we are finding ourselves here today is right after that there are these 2 special prisoners who come from the palace of the Pharaoh, and they have these dreams that God has given them, and then Joseph interprets those dreams and they come true exactly as he's interpreted them. One person gets his head chopped off and the other person goes back to serve the Pharaoh. It sucks to be the baker who got his head chopped off. But so Joseph asks the guy who ends up going back to serve Pharaoh to please don't forget about me. I've been put in here. I haven't done anything wrong. I've been stolen from my homeland and now I've been enslaved and put into this prison for absolutely no good reason. So please remember me and like speak on my behalf or something to the Pharaoh. And of course the butler goes back and he's just overjoyed that he doesn't get his head chopped off as well, and so he completely forgets about Joseph. And then a couple of years roll past and all of a sudden the Pharaoh himself has these really terrifying warning dreams, and we find those dreams in chapter 41. So just a quick overview, essentially there's these 2 dreams that he gets in the night. And the first one, he sees these 7 really fat and juicy, yummy looking cows come up out of the river, and they're just grazing, they're just having a good time. And then all of a sudden, there are these 7 really scrawny, gaunt, ugly, you know, emaciated cows that come up out of the river and they eat those first 7 fat, juicy cows. And then he wakes up and he's terrified, and then he goes back to sleep, and then the same thing happens again. This time he has another dream, and in that dream there are these 7 plump, juicy looking heads of grain that grow up on one stalk of grain, of whether that's wheat or corn or whatever it is. There are these grain and they're really beautiful and plump and full. And then all of a sudden there's another head of grain that grows up. There's another 7 of these heads on this one stalk, and they're all really blighted by the east wind, which means basically the desert wind that dries it all up and destroys the crops. And it's just this symbol of death and famine. And those 7 famine stalks, like these empty heads of grain, come and eat the fat juicy ones, and that's the end of the dream. He wakes up and he's terrified, and he calls his magicians and all of his, you know, priests of all the various temples of all the various Egyptian gods, and he asks for an explanation. And now let's just pause here for a second, because obviously he's the Pharaoh, and if you know much about Egyptian mythology or culture, the Pharaoh was considered to be the son of the gods. So if the Pharaoh had a dream, which was expected for any ruler in the ancient Near East, if they were to receive a dream from the gods, they were expected to be the ones who would be able to probably, you know, figure out what it meant, because, you know, obviously they're the son of the gods and this is some kind of special communication that they have with the gods, between, you know, humanity and the gods. And so for Pharaoh to at this point already be calling in other people, like the priests and everything, that's already showing a level of, I'm really desperate because I cannot figure this out. And it goes even further because we see then that the priests are like, we have no idea what this means. And usually the priests back then, they would have all sorts of different various symbols that they would line up and go, oh yeah, look, this probably has to do with this, and they'd come up with a whole bunch of different answers for the Pharaoh if it were any other dream. But this time they're completely drawing a blank. They've got nothing. They have nothing to contribute to this. And Pharaoh's like, what? Who am I supposed to talk to then? What is going on? And so he's like terrified of these warning dreams, and he cannot figure them out, and nobody else that works for him in the entire kingdom can figure it out, whose job it is to actually do that. And so he's at this place of severe desperation. And while he's there in his desperation, his chief butler, who just so happens to have known Joseph and how he deals with dreams, he's remembering, and he says, oh, I'm so sorry, Pharaoh, look, I have done this terrible thing. I've completely forgotten to speak up for somebody when I promised to. There's this guy, he's in prison, or he was at least a couple of years ago, and he interpreted my dreams and they came true. So maybe you have some hope there. And so Pharaoh, in his complete desperation, is now stooping so low as to getting a barbarian slave out of prison to come and interpret his dreams. And so they call for Joseph, and Joseph is like, hold on a second, I need to get clean, I need to wash my hair, I need to get a haircut, I need to put some clean clothes on. And he does everything to make himself look presentable. He's like, I'm going to the palace, I'm not gonna go unshaved and wearing manky clothes. Where can I get a better outfit? Somebody give me a better outfit already. And he goes in as polished and as well dressed as any slave prisoner can find, you know, the way to do so. And so he walks in there, and then the Pharaoh gets straight to the point. He says, hey, I've been told that you can interpret dreams, and I have some dreams for you to interpret. And I love what Joseph says here. Actually, let's have a quick look. Wrong page. In Genesis chapter 41, verse 16, so Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Okay, so it's really important that Joseph is already acknowledging that it is God who is going to give this interpretation. That he's just the guy who's got the mouth, who's going to do the talking, but it's actually coming straight from God. Okay, and so Pharaoh tells him the dream. He adds not only what he saw in the dream, but he also says, and I felt this particular way about this particular thing, if you look closely. For example, he says that the 7 other cows were so poor and ugly and gaunt, such ugliness I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And so he adds his own personal response to the things that he saw. He says, I saw these things and this is how I felt about it at the same time. And then without much further ado, Joseph says, hey, this is exactly what this means. And he gives him the direct interpretation. And then he also adds a little bit more to it himself. He says this is the interpretation, and this is a sure thing to happen because you got the dream twice. So that's an important principle of dream interpretation, that if the dream is confirmed and it comes more than once, then it is sure to happen because God has, you know, sent it twice and it's a confirmation. So that's just a little side thing. But he also adds and says, let Pharaoh do this. So we're in verse 34. Oh no, hold on. We're in verse 33. He says, now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. That's a 20% tax rate. That's disgusting, but go Joseph. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food will be as a reserve for the land for 7 years of famine which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. So what he's doing here is he's giving the interpretation of the dream, and he's also basically lining out a decent business plan for the Pharaoh to implement and say, hey, you need to, get a guy in charge who can deal with this situation, and I suggest 20% tax rate on all the grain because there's going to be lots of it and you're going to want it for later on, and then you'll be set for the next 7 years, so no worries. And the Pharaoh is just sitting there like gobsmacked going, well, that's a lot to take in. There's going to be a lot of grain coming in for 7 years, and then there's not for the next 7 years, and then this guy is saying, hey, we need somebody in charge. You know what? I reckon it's absolutely clear that this guy is filled with the spirit of his God. I don't know how people see these things. Apparently it's just completely plain and evident. But Pharaoh said, well, in verse 37 it says, so the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. So they're all looking at Joseph going, yeah, that's a pretty cool thing to say. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? So yeah, he's just really stating the obvious here, like, this guy, I don't know where he comes from, but he's filled with the Spirit of God, and everyone's like, yep, seems about right. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And so at this point, Pharaoh is like, you're going to be my prime minister. I'm the guy in charge. I don't do a lot, but you'll basically be the guy in charge. And so he takes off his signet ring, the thing that, if he were to stamp a document that says, hey, this document was stamped by the Pharaoh, and he gives it to Joseph to hang on to and to use in everyday business. And so Joseph is basically wielding the power of Pharaoh on a day-to-day basis. And so they go for this great big chariot ride throughout the city, and everyone's bowing and scraping, and everyone's hearing about all of a sudden there's this new guy Joseph in charge. And actually what happens is the Pharaoh gives Joseph a few new things in this situation. So he was made prime minister on the spot in one day, and he was given a new name, and he was also given a wife. So there's a lot that's just happened and came together all of a sudden for Joseph. It was all working out really well for him this particular day. So when he's given this new position, he's taken out of the pit, out of the prison, out of his slavery, and now elevated to the greatness that God had shown him in his dreams many, many years ago, now 13 odd years ago, before he became a slave. He is now elevated, and he receives a new name. And I can't remember if I've talked about this before on this channel. Doesn't matter, we'll talk about it again today. New names in the Bible are really, really significant. So if you look at any name in the Bible, the name usually translates to meaning something about that person's character or something about their storyline, essentially. So if you look at the word Adam, so as in Adam from the Garden of Eden, it means of the earth, and obviously God made him out of the dirt, out of the earth. And there's a bunch of different names like this where there is a meaning that translates to something about that person or about their characteristics, their character, their story, something like that. And it's happened a few times in the Bible where a person's name has been deliberately changed. So we see in the New Testament, we see Saul, who was persecuting the Christians, change his name to Paul. And like, there's other places like in Revelation that indicate that God gives us a new name. He gives us this white stone with a new name on it that only that person who receives that stone knows what that name is. And so that's God like basically indicating that we have become a new person, a new creation in him, and we receive this new identity in him. And in the case of, so for example, when Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego went to Babylon as young slaves, to be educated in the Babylonian court system and to be, I guess, governors and princes of their realm, trained in the Babylonian ways. When they turned up in Babylon, they were given new names. And even Esther When she was a little girl, her name was Hadassah, but she was given a new name, a new identity, and this signified a radical shift in each of their lives. So what is happening here is Joseph is having a radical shift of his life in this one particular day. He's gone from drudgery of years on end, like 13 years of slavery, the last 3 years maybe of being in prison and completely forgotten about and betrayed and abandoned and rejected and all of these horrible things. And now all of a sudden he's the guy in charge and he has the power of life and death literally on his finger. So it's only normal, if you understand how the Bible works, for the Pharaoh to be giving him this new name. And the new name that he gives him translates to "this one lives." And that's completely what we see about Joseph's life. He definitely is one who survives and lives, despite what his brothers did to him, despite what Potiphar's wife tried to do to him. He lived. He not only lived through all of the attempts on his life and on his character and all those kind of things, but now he's just about to start living, really. And that's what we're going to see in a minute. So I really want to focus on what happens now that he's got this wife who I'd like to suggest could be his kingdom marriage partner, because now he's come into this kingdom assignment that God has always planned for him to have, right? So he's come into this position and God's set him right where he needs to be. He gives him a wife immediately. He gives him this brand new name to indicate this radical shift in his life, and things begin to get really good. So immediately they come into the 7 years of plenty, which will be then preceded by the 7 years of famine that they need to prepare for. So Joseph is in his element and he is prepared to put all the grain that's going to come flooding in a huge amount of abundance to store it for the years where there will be famine. And as he's doing that, and now that he's married, which is just a blessing, honestly, he has these 2 kids in these first 7 years of abundance. And these 2 kids, they seem to come at separate times in those 7 years, and he names them very specific names. So we see names are important once again in this story. And what he calls them, let's quickly read what it says. It's in chapter 41, verses 50 to 52. It says, "And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. For God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction." Now, he doesn't just give the names here, he gives the meanings of those names, and I love that. So as Joseph's wife is bearing these children, Joseph is experiencing changes in his life, changes in his personhood. And the names indicate 2 specific things. I want to focus on the first one for a minute. So the first name, which was Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house, it means essentially he was named to glorify God as he had brought healing for the emotional wounds of being a slave and betrayed by his brothers, and even the toxicity of his family dynamics. So he's saying that God has made me forget all of my toil, my slavery, all my hardship, and all of my father's house, all the toxicity, all of the betrayal from my brothers, all of that. God has made me forget that. He's brought healing in that space in my heart, which is just beautiful. And then the second son he calls Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And I love this. It's not just now about healing, it's about fruitfulness. And so he's named for the success, the abundance and fullness of joy and triumph that God has brought to Joseph in such an unlikely place and situation. 13 to 20 years beforehand, Joseph had been sold into slavery into Egypt, and he would never ever have imagined living very long, let alone having such abundance and glory as he was now experiencing. And yet God had not just brought him healing from all of those experiences, but he brought him all of the abundance, all of the joy, all the fruitfulness in this land of affliction. Despite where he was, despite the surroundings, God had fully turned it around for him, and he recognized that. And it was just, that's so beautiful to me. So yeah, in such a short time, the previous 13 years of pain, slavery, betrayal, false accusation, all of this has not only been emotionally healed, but Joseph can experience this fullness and this joy. And that's what I want to leave you guys with today, that God has a plan for you. And despite wherever you may be, whatever you may have gone through, God has a plan for you. And you might have a really dramatic experience like Joseph did, and in one day everything turns around, you get a new name, you get a new wife or husband or whatever. Or it might be different, it might be slow, it might be at whatever pace that God has for you. But you will experience, whether it is in this life or in the life to come, in eternity in heaven with God, you will experience this fullness of joy, this healing, this abundance, this fruitfulness in your life. I promise you. Please, please take very close attention to your relationship with Jesus. Stay faithful to him. Stay in love with him. And he will honestly give you such wonderful and great rewards. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope that this has helped you and that this has blessed you. Please let me know in the comments below what you reckon, and I will see you guys again next Friday. Bye. Hey guys, before you go, I just wanted to let you know about my very favorite book that is actually about Joseph and his life. Now, this book was written probably like 20 years ago now, and I have loved it my whole life essentially, and I have been reading it, my family's been reading it, a lot of my friends have read it, and actually really recently they released it on Kindle, so it's a lot more accessible for everyone to get a hold of. So if you head down to the link in the description below, you'll be able to be taken to the Amazon page and you can buy it through that link. And if you do, I'm just letting you know that I have just recently partnered with the Amazon Associates program, and so if you do buy through that link, you'll actually be supporting me a little bit. I'll get a tiny little bit off the top. So yeah, just letting you know, this is one of my very favorite books of all time. It's actually really shaped my understanding of the Bible and of Bible times culture, and really being able to dive deeper into Bible stories. So if you want to see the things that have really inspired me as I've been growing up over the years as a Christian and helped me understand the Bible a lot more in depth, I would really highly recommend that you go and check that out. Okay, thank you so much. I will see you guys all again next Friday. Bye.